Okay, hello and welcome to today's Doors Open Baltimore presentation presented by the Baltimore Architecture Foundation. I'm Nathan Denny's Associate Director of the Baltimore Architecture Foundation. First, thank you to everyone who donated to be with us, and thank you to Doors Open in Baltimore sponsors, grantors, and in-kind supporters. It's through your support that we've been able to host all these free programs for Doors Open this month, nearly every day in October. Today's program is the third in our Doors Open Baltimore Spiritual Week, the fifth and final week of Doors Open Baltimore. And if you haven't seen it yet, we have a wonderful 360-degree tour of St. Mark's Lutheran Church on our YouTube page. And you can see this and all the Doors Open offerings at www.doorsopenbaltimore.org. I also encourage everyone to participate in our Instagram at-home photo contest. We love to see photos of buildings around your neighborhood. Use the hashtag DoorsOpenBaltimore on Instagram to participate. The contest ends on October 31st, and prizes are available. And now for today's presentation. We are joined by Jessica Williams of the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law, the stewards of Westminster. If you have questions for Jessica, please add them to the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. With that, Jessica, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jessica Williams. As mentioned, I am the Associate Director at Westminster Hall and Burying Ground, where Baltimore history rests in peace. I have two of my colleagues also joining me today, Luann Marshall and Joanne Masenko, and I thank them greatly because they offer a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience working at Westminster for such a long time. I just myself celebrated my year anniversary in September, but it's been an unexpected year with the pandemic. You know, I've been teleworking for about 6 months now. And so the year that I thought I would be in Westminster, I have not. So creating this presentation has been very informative and enjoyable for me. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I created it. And Luann and Joanne, feel free to join in where you need to. People have traveled far and wide to visit historic Westminster Hall, the Burying Grounds and the Catacombs. Visitors can explore one of Baltimore's oldest cemeteries, seen here, which contains tombs of prominent political, military, and business leaders, some of our earliest mayors, several generals from the American Revolution and War of 1812, and of course, the grave of Edgar Allan Poe, which is our most popular tourist attraction. The graveyard was originally established in 1786. This was a time in Baltimore when Baltimore had people living in the community, and there were some other surrounding graveyards. But there was a problem. These surrounding graveyards, some were built close to the Jones Falls. And so what you found is that some of the graveyards were sliding into the Jones Falls. And you can imagine if a graveyard is starting to slide and a windstorm comes or a rainstorm comes, what could possibly be floating in the Jones Falls waters or the harbor waters, be it bodies or jewelry of individuals or tombstones or whatever that may be. So they had to start looking for other land, and that land is what we see here in West Baltimore. The church or the hall was once Westminster Presbyterian Church. This was constructed years after the graveyard was built. The church was constructed because now we have a growing population. 60 years later, now there are merchants, there are more people living, and Baltimore is developing. The church was developed for a couple of reasons. One, because as mentioned, the Presbyterian congregation was growing and they needed a place for fellowship and worship. But two, it was also to protect the cemetery. there were, you have vandalism, you have kids running around in the cemetery. So this was a way to protect the grounds. Luann, do you want to add anything else about the church being built?
Well, one of the things that happened with the graveyard at the Jones Falls, not only was it, jewelry or whatever, bodies would float down into the harbor. And as you can imagine, that was particularly gruesome, especially if it was one of your family. That's probably one of the major reasons that Westminster was founded.
Okay, thank you. So this is the church. It is pretty much exactly what you would have seen back in 1852. If you are on the corner of Green Street and Fayette Street and you look up, you can imagine being in Baltimore City today, walking past this. And I mean, when you look at it, instantly this is a historic site. And again, we welcome many from around the world. You always hear Westminster Hall, the Burying Grounds, and the Catacombs. The catacombs ultimately are a covered graveyard. So when the church was built over the catacombs. So what you see in the top right-hand picture is underneath. You can kind of see the poles or the stilts that hold up the church. You can kind of walk around or imagine yourself walking around in the catacombs. And these are some of the things you would see in the catacombs. We host a catacombs tour, which is very, very popular, but due to the pandemic, we have had to stop it. But what you would see, for instance, is this family right here on the left-hand side of your screen. This is William Robb. William Robb died August 3rd of 1804. The bottom picture on the right-hand side, which a lot of people find so fascinating, this is a glass casket for a child, a ice casket for a child. You have the top, you have the bottom. The body would go inside of the casket or that hole that you see, and you would fill it with ice all around the casket. This would preserve the body a little longer. You can imagine back then in the 1700s, early 1800s, children didn't live that long because of measles, because of smallpox, because of the flu, and they didn't have the vaccinations or the cures. Many kids didn't live but a couple of years. And if they lived to be older, it was pretty much a miracle. It was fascinating. Luann, do you have anything to mention about the catacombs?
Yes, the bottom right, the icebox casket, people used to be buried within 24 hours because they couldn't keep the body fresh. And that had nothing to do with religious preferences. It was simply a matter of smell. So they figured out finally that keeping the body cold would allow people to come visit and pay their respects instead of just going to the grave site. So that's the reason for the icebox casket.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Westminster, again, if you are walking on the street of Fayette or Green Street, what you will see is a huge brick wall that surrounds Westminster Hall and the burying ground. And then one historic site that you will see on Green Street is the Freud Gate. Maximilian Godefroy was commissioned by the church to build this gate. He was a French architect who settled in Baltimore after designing St. Mary's Seminary Chapel. The gate was designed in 1813, and it's one of the country's first examples of Egyptian revival architecture. Godfrey used imagery and symbolism of ancient Egypt. If you were to walk past the gate today, this is what you see. What I noticed, if you look at the top of the gate and the bottom of the gate, you can see that ancient Egyptian kind of symbolism. I pulled a couple of pictures off of the website or off of the internet that you can look above the picture on the left-hand side, And you can see pictures of Egyptian symbolism and imagery, and you can see how he implemented that into the gates that you see today. We are also right now thankful, and let me give a cheers and a claps for Maryland Preservation Trust, because we are right now, we have received a grant from them to get the gate restored. Those pillars that you see on the sides that are kind of holding the gate together, those pillars are deteriorating. It's not for any reason but the fact that they are hundreds and hundreds of years old, and the wear and tear and the weather. And it's my understanding there was an accident years ago with an MTA bus. But right now we're getting these repaired, and again, thank you to Westminster Preservation Trust for thank you for Maryland Preservation Trust for doing that. We had a video that we were going to show, and unfortunately the video doesn't work. So before I get into Westminster closing, Luann, I'm going to take it back to you, because if you can you tell us a little bit about the church closing, why the church closed, how Greenmount Cemetery more so affected Westminster preservation?
In its heyday, when it was first built, there were about 400 active members. And by the time we closed in 1977, there were about 5 active members. And of course, they couldn't maintain the church. So it was taken over by the Westminster Preservation Trust, and we did the renovations. And of course, we now run the site. The graveyard was active until 1943. And when Greenmount Cemetery opened north of the city, it was huge. It's like 450 acres of rolling lawns. And by the time that they were founded, we were in the middle of the city, and it wasn't quite as lush. So we lost a number of people from Westminster to Greenmount Cemetery. So there are a lot of graves that are not quite as full as they used to be.
Okay, thank you. So the closing of Westminster Church in 1977 represented an important challenge to Maryland, the challenge of restoring and preserving one of the most significant and interesting landmarks that many, many people traveled to. With interested Marylanders, as Luann mentioned, and in conjunction with the UMB School of Law and the Westminster Preservation Trust, a nonprofit was established. The trust would restore the property. What you're seeing here is the restoration of the property. The top right-hand corner shows the church as it once was, with the stained glass windows, the pews where the congregation would sit. The left-hand side shows pretty much the demolition, removing everything, the painting, the scaffolding, all of what happened. And then the bottom shows what it is today. When they were trying to figure out what Westminster would be, their interior space was designed to provide a handsome Gothic reading rooms, or handsome Gothic reading rooms that would be adjacent to the law school, in addition to space for concerts, ceremonies, and meetings for the community, for the UMB community, and for the law school. And then the landscaping of the cemetery would be kept up, and we would restore the historic features, and it would be an enclosed garden. So what you see today is that bottom picture that is used for different events. And then the garden or the cemetery, on any given day, probably right now, you have individuals who come and you walk around the cemetery, you tour the cemetery, you read about the different individuals who were in the cemetery. Luann, I'm going to take it back to you. Do you want to tell us about some of the people who are in the cemetery, some of the more prominent individuals?
Sam Smith was basically responsible for the defense of Baltimore in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. If it were not for Edgar Allan Poe, he would probably be our most famous resident. We have many of the founding fathers and mothers. We have James McHenry, after whom Fort McHenry was named. And if you were to stroll through the graveyard, and if you're familiar with Baltimore, in the early 1800s, Baltimore streets were named, and they used many of the names from the patriots in the graveyard. So there's Bentaloo, McHenry, Ramsey, Sterrett. It's like a who's who of Baltimore.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Luann. One of the other, let me go back really quick. If you look at the picture, bottom picture on the right-hand side, the focal point, if you've ever been into Westminster Hall, is that pipe organ that you see in the center. When the church closed in 1977, the pipe organ did not work. They had to repair and restore the pipe organ. So it was taken apart in 1980, was restored, retuned, and refitted, in 1991 by the Andover Organ Company of Lawrence, Massachusetts. This also included re-stenciling the zinc case pipes in their original 9 colors. If you look, this is a picture of our pipe organ today. It is honestly a sight for sore eyes. On the right-hand side, you can see the stenciling and the amount of time it would have taken for this to get done, because everything, you can see the intricate details, you can see the colors, just beautiful. And a lot of people who use or rent the space today, one reason is because of that pipe organ, because of that beautiful backdrop. Today, the pipe organ still works, and we also host what is called Lunch Under the Pipes. Lunch Under the Pipes is a series that usually starts in the spring. And this is a lunch series that begins at 12 o'clock. The community can come with their lunch and they sit. And sometimes we will have the pipe organ playing. We will have soloists. We invite schools to perform. It's many different activities that take place. So what I will say is in the spring, God willing, we will have Lunch Under the Pipes, and I hope some of you will come and visit us. Westminster today. This is Westminster today. Westminster, still with the cemetery outside for people to tour, still with the catacombs underneath that people visit constantly when we're open. But Westminster now, as mentioned, is a hall. It is a hall that hosts weddings. It's a hall that hosts corporate events, nonprofit events. You can see how people use Westminster Hall and the beauty that Westminster Hall has. Some people, I think, you think of a cemetery, you think of an old church, and you think it's spooky, but it really isn't. And people look at Westminster for the rich history and the beauty. You see the venue here. You can see outside the young men in the cemetery and how they're using the cemetery as a backdrop. And then here's another photo. Again, you see the pipe organ as that focal piece. And then on the right-hand side, you can see again how individuals are using the church and the cemetery as that beautiful backdrop. Today, Westminster, as I mentioned, is known for the grave of Edgar Allan Poe. The original grave is back in the cemetery for people to view. But in 1875, there's a story of a school teacher who raised money. It was called Pennies for Poe. She thought that Poe, this amazing writer, this amazing poet, should not be in the back of a cemetery. He should have a more prominent location. So she raised money, and the marble monument that you see right here on the left-hand side of the screen, it sits directly at the entrance of the Fayette Street entrance. And she raised, it was Pennies for Poe, and she raised enough money to have this monument built. And then later Poe's body was brought up to this location along with his wife, Virginia, and his mother-in-law, Maria Clem. Luann, do you have anything additional to to add, or Joanne?
Yes, I do. He was actually moved twice.
Okay.
His original grave is to the left, but when they purchased that monument, it was originally put on the back grave and it wouldn't fit on that site. So they moved him to the right, where you see the gravestone with the raven on it. That was where that large monument was placed. People still couldn't find him, even with that large monument. So they moved him in November of 1875 to the front, just inside the gates. Now, his wife, Virginia, died in New York and was brought down to Baltimore about 10 years after he was moved. And she joined him. His mother-in-law joined him immediately, but she came down about 10 years later.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Luann. And as mentioned, this is our number one attraction. We get so many people in the months of October, that is during the Poe Festival and during his death week. And then we get another ton of people in January when he was born. So that pretty much concludes our presentation. Nathan, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, we have some questions coming through, and if you have a question, please, now is the time to add them to the chat box. This was a great presentation. Actually, yesterday we had a presentation on some other churches, and we were talking about how challenging it is to adapt churches for the present day. And I think Westminster Hall is an example of a really great adaptation, and to see it being used today and kept up is really nice. One question I have is, with this Saturday being Halloween, I'm sure there's lots of people who would want to go see Poe's grave. Is it accessible to the public?
So each Halloween, and I would say for the last 20 plus years, we have hosted a Halloween event where we usually have reenactors and people can tour the catacombs and they can tour the graveyard. This is the first year that we will not be having our Halloween event due to the pandemic. The cemetery will be open for touring. The cemetery is usually open daily for touring right now until 6 o'clock. We won't host our event, but if you log on to our website, we do have a brief virtual tour of the burying ground and the catacombs. It's more so a teaser. It's going to tell you a couple of stories about Poe, a couple of stories about the catacombs, a little about the hall itself. And then it's, of course, when we open, we hope to have you back in to visit firsthand.
Great.
And of course, we can host group tours for people who want to come in. You don't have to wait for Halloween. So, once this is all over, we can, host groups coming in, and we schedule tours typically April through November on Friday and Saturdays, the first and third Friday and Saturday. And that would be up on our website as well once things return to normal.
And someone in the chat mentioned the mysterious midnight toast, but what's that about?
Okay, every year on January 19th, since 1943, someone has come into the graveyard and left a half bottle of Martell cognac and 3 red roses, one for each member of the family under the monument. And the person stopped visiting. So usually on January 19th or the weekend closest, we host an event where someone comes out and leaves a bottle of cognac, and people are actually allowed to witness it. It's not done in the middle of the night anymore.
Great. I have a question here about the building. It looked like there was an outline on the tower where a clock used to be. Did it used to have a clock?
Never had a clock. It looks like there should be a clock, but there was never a clock there.
Okay, and what happened to the 4 spires that were on top of the tower?
Yes, I do think, unfortunately, I don't hold that knowledge, but I do, and I'm going back in this presentation where I do believe, give me one second. There we go. That was one of the original photos that we had in our collection, and they have been removed, but I could not answer. Luann, do you know?
I believe they were struck by lightning, and now we have a lightning rod up there, and that was why
Okay.
they were removed.
Okay.
Yeah, that would make sense. That's probably one of the more common ways that spires are destroyed from churches. Ironically, it's an act of God.
Right, right.
Okay, I'm going through some more questions here. Let's see. Okay, we talked about okay, is John Aston still doing Poe readings?
He has been there during the Poe birthday celebration. I know he was there 2 years ago where he did some readings. Now, again, who knows what the state of the world will be this January, but he is a big, huge Poe fan, and he lives part-time in Baltimore. So he may well come back when we're back to normal.
Great. And I think in the spirit of this week being Halloween, I was wondering if you have any ghost stories associated with
Well, thankfully, I have never seen or heard anything, or I'd probably have another job. But most ghost hunters I have worked with hear a man yelling for them to go away, and it's always in the same location. So I have no personal knowledge. I can only report to you what other people have seen. Now, I have been there by myself at 2 a.m. in the morning and had the hair on the back of my neck stand up and been a little creeped out, and have been told by psychics that that is someone trying to contact you. As I said, I would really rather not be contacted.
Someone was asking about the Lunch Under the Pipes program, when it might resume. I know you were saying that hopefully this spring, but I mean, obviously it's hard to know at this point, right?
Yep, I would say check back on the website. We hope to resume in March or April, but it really, with Westminster falling under the university is taking this pandemic, as we all, very seriously, and the health and safety of faculty, staff, and visitors is their number one priority. So we're receiving our directives from the university. So we hope Lunch Under the Pipes will resume, but we don't know at this point.
And also in October, we generally have a movie with popcorn and refreshments, something in line with Halloween. So that's one of my favorite times. And we also host silent movies accompanied by the organ. That's also another fun event.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about what the Lunch Under the Pipes program is?
Mm-hmm. The Lunch Under the Pipes program is a free program sponsored by the Trust. This is an opportunity for you to walk in at 12 o'clock. You bring your lunch. We have tables, we have chairs set up, and then there is a performance. Now, the performances vary. It may actually be an organist playing the pipe organ. It could be a school group singing. We've had jazz bands, as Luann said. We've had silent movies with the organ playing in the background. It's a variety of different activities, but they usually last about an hour. People come in and enjoy, and then they go back to work.
We also allow people sometimes to walk into the back of the organ to see how that looks. There are none of the pipes that you see on the organ provide music. All the music comes from the inside, and there's like 1,300 pipes. So if one of the organists is there, they will escort you in to look into the workings of the organ.
Great, thank you. I saw someone in the chat just shared some information about the identity of the Poe toaster. Lots of discussion about that. But I think we're at our time for today. It's 12:30. But thank you so much for being with us, ladies, to talk about Westminster. And I hope that we can include Westminster as part of Doors Open Baltimore next year in person. That would be a delight to see it in the inside. But again, thank you so much. And if you enjoy this program, I encourage you to go to www.doorsopenbaltimore.org to see the rest of our upcoming programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.